Kyousuke has been the latest prospect to be signed to a tier 1 organization, and with Falcons bombing out of the major, it begs the question, will Kyousuke be able to fix Falcons and finally take them to a championship level roster? Today, we're going to be talking about how Kyousuke aims and his unique way of spraying. And at the end of the video, I'm going to show you how you can train these skills to be able to do them just like Kyousuke. Some of the training modes you will see in this video are going to be made by Refrag, which I'll have a discount for later in the video, so make sure you stay tuned for that. The first thing we want to pay attention to is movement. And for me, after watching players like Donk and Rops, it's super interesting to see how all three players have very unique aiming styles. Rops, of course, is much more calculated and likes to take the best possible duels. Donk uses his movement to make himself hard to hit, while also having some of the best raw mechanics in the game. And for Kyousuke, I would say he's a bit more in between. He isn't necessarily the hard entry style like Donk, and on top of that, his movement is completely different to how Donk uses movement, especially in gunfights. So what's the difference? Donk is obviously famous for the Donk slide, where you basically peek out, crouch, and then start crouch spraying back in the direction you came from. A lot of pros have picked up on this style, and it's a really good way of just displacing the aim of the enemy you're versing. But for Kyousuke, he does things very differently. Kyousuke will very rarely full crouch spray in a fight, and more often than not, he'll just use a basic counter strafe and a crouch to offset the opponent's aim. In this example, you can see how as soon as Kyousuke spots someone, he instantly counter strafes, effectively stopping his movement completely, and then also uses a crouch. This obviously helps to slow his velocity and gives him a more accurate shot, but it also makes his opponents miss the instant headshot. And that is extremely important, and a lot of people just don't think about it. There are countless examples of this, and Kyousuke will often just use different movement techs. In this example, he's constantly AD strafing, and then hits them with the crouch peek as soon as they peek him. And this is another example of why this crouch is really effective, and a lot of people should be using it way more. Now, another aspect of how Kyousuke aims is to do with his spray. And like the previous example, it's a rather unique way of spraying. Instead of a full crouch spray like most players do, Kyousuke will spray while constantly spamming A and D to effectively kind of micro counter strafe on the spot. And this is really interesting because obviously when you full crouch spray, you maintain accuracy, and that's why most people do it. It helps with accuracy, and obviously it helps that you can move as well, displacing the aim of the enemy opponent. This is why obviously the donk slide is so damn strong. And that's why it's interesting to look at Kyousuke, because his style of spraying still maintains high accuracy, but it also allows you to maintain some movement, which is obviously essential in modern Counter-Strike. Often when Kyousuke does these sprays, he'll mix in a couple of crouches here and there just to constantly keep himself moving and hard to hit. If Kyousuke doesn't hit the instant headshot, he's going to very rarely whiff the spray, and because his style of aiming so effortlessly kind of transitions into this spray AD spam style, it actually helps him control the fight a lot more in the way that he wants to, where he can incorporate some of the movement that Donk would use, for example, where he crouches out, comes back in, and overall it's just a really annoying style to deal with if you are the opponent versing him. Now, a lot of people have also noticed just how good Kyousuke is with the deagle. It's actually a highlight weapon of his, and obviously there are a ton of good deagle players out there. Nico is probably the most famous one, and he actually does have a very similar style of aiming, especially with the deagle. I think that a lot of people have the misconception that to be good with the deagle, you need to be good at tracking or hitting the flick headshot, and honestly, it's just not really true. The most important thing is actually your crosshair placement. And obviously this is true for a lot of Counter-Strike weapons, but it's especially important with the deagle because you don't have the ability to fall back to the spray. It's really quite easy as well to kind of tell how good a player's crosshair placement is just based on how they aim with the deagle. You can see how good their pre-aims are and how good their placement is. In this first clip, you'll notice that Kyousuke actually barely moves his crosshair when using the deagle. He likes to hold the angle and wait for the opponent to run into it and basically just hit the reaction shot without moving his crosshair. This is actually very, very consistent. He doesn't make any crazy adjustments or flick onto their head. He just hits the basic shot holding the angle. And when he peeks into angles, his crosshair placement and pre-aim is basically perfect, and it's something that a lot of us can improve on but we just don't most of the time. It's clear that Kyousuke has practiced this type of stuff and he's extremely good at it. So what do we need to practice if we want to aim like Kyousuke? The first thing is the spamming AD spraying style. Instead of crouch spraying, we need to get into the habit of just staying still and constantly AD while spraying. And that is something we will be practicing. The next thing is counter strafing. So this is something that obviously people naturally are pretty decent at, but Kyousuke is extremely good at it, and we want to be incorporating the crouch tap as well once we counter strafe to just completely stop our movement and offset the opponent's aim. The last thing that we want to be looking at is pre-aim and specifically crosshair placement as well, which luckily for us, Refrag has a perfect game mode for. So to train these, we are obviously going to be using Refrag, which I believe is the best CS2 training platform. If you give it a go, you're going to find it's way better than any workshop maps you've tried before. And if you want to try it, you can use the code Kyousuke15 to get 15% off your subscription today. So let's get back to the training. So to practice the AD spraying style, we actually have a few game modes that we can try. So the first one is going to just be the typical spray mode. This is just making sure that our spray is actually good before we start incorporating the ADs. So to use this, you basically just aim at a wall and just start spraying, and you just want to ensure that your accuracy is really, really good here. You can practice at close range, medium range. The outline that appears with your spray is going to be accurate at any distance that you aim at. So it's important to practice this and make sure that our spray is good before we move on to incorporating the movement. Now, when we want to incorporate the movement, something that I really love to use is spray transfer. And this is a mode I've mentioned many times before, but we're going to obviously be focusing on spamming our counter strafe keys and just spraying down a group of opponents. This is probably the best way to practice this spraying style. And now we're going to move on to the counter strafing. So for counter strafing, there are a couple of different modes we could use. What I would probably use for this is, first of all, crossfire. So we want to be constantly moving and basically just counter strafing when we spot an enemy, tapping crouch, and just trying to kill them as soon as possible. And the second game mode we can use is something called Angle Trainer. Now, Angle Trainer basically just spawns in 2 bots at a random location. And this is nice because you can practice kind of pathing into the entry and just counter strafing as soon as you spot someone, tapping crouch and trying to get the instant headshot. And if you don't hit the headshot, that's when we can kind of transition into the AD spraying style that Kyousuke is so good at. Now, the final thing that we're looking at is pre-aim and crosshair placement. We actually have a perfect game mode for this. It's called X-Fire, and X-Fire basically combines pre-fire and crossfire game modes into one game mode, which is really nice if we want to practice both of these in one game mode. So you're going to be peeking out, and there's going to be some bots who are basically in pre-fire angles. They're going to be in common angles that you need to have good pre-aim for, and once you kill that person, there's going to be another bot that swings out, and that's where the kind of crossfire element comes in, where you need to basically hold for their swing back into the trade. So you can practice this with either a deagle or a rifle. I think either is fine for this particular game mode, and once you practice all 3 of these, I think you're going to be in a perfect spot to aim just like Kyousuke. So that's the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, make sure you leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and also share this video with other people who might want to be aiming like Kyousuke. Thanks for watching, and peace out.